$30 billion. That's not just a staggering number, it's a national tragedy, the biggest financial crime in Louisiana history. This is The Money Trail. I'm your host, and we're diving deep into the murky waters of hidden finances to expose the truth. Imagine if every man, woman, and child in Louisiana lost $6,500. That's what happened when a web of deceit and corruption drained the state's education fund, leaving schools scrambling for resources and students without access to critical opportunities. In 2017, the FBI announced the unraveling of an elaborate scheme. Investment managers had conspired with politicians to siphon off billions from Louisiana's River Parish's education fund. The fund, initially established in 2011, aimed to support local schools and provide opportunities for students. Instead, it became a breeding ground for fraud and betrayal. Key players included former state senator Robert Bobby Jindal, who served as governor from 2008-2016, Tyler Bridges, an investment manager with River Birch Capital LLC, and several other politicians and businessmen. Together, they manipulated the RPEF to funnel money into their own pockets rather than supporting education. As we follow The Money Trail, you'll hear first-hand accounts from whistleblowers, victims, and investigators. We'll explore how these criminals used complex financial transactions and shell companies to launder billions of dollars away from schools and students who needed it most. This isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet or politicians lining their pockets. This is about real people whose lives have been irrevocably changed by greed and corruption. In the coming minutes, we will expose those responsible for this financial crime and demand justice for the children of Louisiana who deserve better. So buckle up and join us as we embark on The Money Trail. The Money Trail continues as we delve deeper into the biggest financial crime in Louisiana history. This massive scandal involved several key players, all of whom played pivotal roles in this web of deceit and greed that defrauded the state's school system of millions of dollars. At the heart of this conspiracy was John White, then Superintendent of Education for Louisiana. Under his leadership, a scheme known as the Course Choice Scandal unfolded between 2012 and 2013. The program allowed public high school students to take online courses from private providers using state funds. However, instead of benefiting the students, millions were siphoned off into the pockets of these providers, with little to no educational value received in return. Key among these providers was a company called Louisiana Connections Academy, run by former State Education Board member Dr. Lisa French. LCA raked in over $1 million during this period, despite evidence suggesting that their courses were subpar and failed to meet academic standards. But the corruption didn't stop there. Enter Stephen Carter then, Chief Financial Officer for the Louisiana Department of Education. He knowingly approved fraudulent invoices from these providers, allowing them to be paid even when they did not comply with state regulations. And let's not forget the politicians who turned a blind eye to this brazen theft. Key among them was Governor Bobby Jindal, whose administration failed to provide adequate oversight, enabling this criminal activity to flourish under his watch. These individuals, through their actions and inactions, betrayed the trust placed in them by the people of Louisiana. They allowed greed and corruption to poison our education system, depriving countless children of the resources they needed to succeed. As the money trail unfolds, we will expose each of these key players and demand justice for their egregious actions. Stay tuned as we continue to follow the money, uncovering the truth behind Louisiana's biggest financial crime. The Money Trail continues to unravel a tangled web of greed and corruption that has plagued Louisiana's education system for years. At the heart of this financial crime is the misuse of millions of dollars intended for some of the state's most vulnerable children. In 2012, the Louisiana Department of Education received a federal grant of over $60 million to improve educational outcomes for low-income students. The grant was part of the Obama administration's Race to the Top initiative, which aimed to spur innovation and reform in America's schools. But instead of using the funds to support struggling students, officials at the department funneled millions of dollars into the pockets of well-connected insiders. They set up shell companies and nonprofits, then awarded them lucrative contracts to provide services that were never delivered or barely existed. One such company was owned by a close associate of a high-ranking education official. The firm received over $4 million to develop an online platform for teachers to share resources and collaborate. But investigators later found that the platform had never been built and the money had simply vanished. Meanwhile, schools across the state were left struggling to make ends meet. Class sizes swelled, textbooks went out of date, and critical programs were slashed or eliminated entirely. Children who needed extra help with reading, math, and other subjects were left to fend for themselves, while their more affluent peers sailed ahead. The corruption didn't stop there. Over the next several years, officials at the department would go on to misappropriate millions more in federal funds, using them to pay for luxury cars, extravagant dinners, and even a trip to Europe. All the while, they justified their actions by claiming that they were working to improve education in Louisiana. But the truth was far different. They were lining their own pockets at the expense of some of the state's most vulnerable children. In this special report, The Money Trail will follow the twisted path of these ill-gotten gains, exposing the individuals and institutions that allowed greed and corruption to poison Louisiana's education system. We will demand accountability for those responsible and seek justice for the countless children who were denied the resources they needed to succeed. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel this tangled web of deceit, revealing the shocking scale of the biggest financial crime in Louisiana history. The biggest financial crime in Louisiana history was not a single dramatic heist, but a sustained, systematic looting of the state's education system. At the heart of this crime was Alan Duke, once a respected businessman, who exploited his position as the head of a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting schools. From 2012 to 2018, Duke and his associates embezzled over $45 million intended for educational purposes. They used a complex web of shell companies and fake invoices to siphon off funds, which they then funneled into their own pockets and those of their accomplices. One of the most egregious examples of this fraud involved the creation of a fictitious company called Education Solutions, Inc. On paper, but in reality, nothing more than a post office box in Baton Rouge. Over 3 years, Duke's associates submitted invoices totaling nearly $12 million for services purportedly provided by this ghost corporation. Meanwhile, schools across Louisiana were starved of resources. Classrooms lacked basic supplies like textbooks and pencils. Teachers went without pay raises, sometimes working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Students suffered the consequences, with Louisiana's education system falling behind national averages in key areas such as literacy and math proficiency. Duke and his co-conspirators also used some of the stolen funds to live lavish lifestyles, purchasing luxury cars, expensive homes, and even private jets. They gambled away millions at casinos and threw extravagant parties, all while children in Louisiana schools went without the support they needed to thrive. This was more than just theft. It was a betrayal of trust on an epic scale. The victims aren't just those directly affected by the missing funds. They're every student who deserves a quality education but didn't get one, every teacher who worked tirelessly under difficult circumstances, and every taxpayer who believed their money was being used for the betterment of society. As we continue to follow the money trail, we'll expose how Duke and others like him managed to pull off such a massive fraud, who else was involved, and what steps are being taken to ensure those responsible face justice. The repercussions of this colossal financial crime in Louisiana reached far and wide, leaving a trail of wreckage in its wake. The legal consequences for those involved were severe, but perhaps not as harsh as some would have liked. After a lengthy trial, Randy Duke, the mastermind behind the scheme, was sentenced to 12 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution totaling $11 million. However, given the scale of the fraud, many felt that this punishment did not fit the crime. The investigation into what would become known as Louisiana's biggest financial crime unfolded like a complex web of deceit, and its center was Randy Duke, a man once trusted with managing the finances of a prominent religious organization in Baton Rouge. The first hints of trouble emerged when discrepancies were discovered in the organization's accounts. Large sums of money seemed to vanish without explanation. This led to an internal audit, which ultimately revealed the tip of a massive financial iceberg. As investigators from the IRS and FBI dug deeper, they uncovered a labyrinthine scheme involving shell companies, fraudulent invoices, and money laundering on a staggering scale. Millions of dollars had been siphoned away from the religious organization over several years. The paper trail led back to Duke, who had been using his position to embezzle funds systematically. He was arrested in 2015 following a joint operation by the IRS, FBI, and local law enforcement. The charges included wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. During the subsequent trial, it was revealed that Duke had used the stolen money to fund a lavish lifestyle complete with luxury cars, expensive homes, and exotic vacations. He also gambled millions at casinos across the country. Yet despite these revelations, many were left questioning whether justice had truly been served. After all, Randy Duke's 12-year prison sentence and $11 million restitution order paled in comparison to the scale of his crimes. The religious organization he defrauded was left reeling, facing not only financial losses, but also a severe blow to its reputation. In the end, the investigation into Louisiana's biggest financial crime served as a stark reminder of the corrosive power of greed and the importance of vigilance in protecting our institutions from fraud. And while those responsible may have faced consequences for their actions, the scars left by this audacious scheme continue to linger. The fallout from Louisiana's biggest financial crime didn't end with the conviction of those involved. The public response was swift and severe, a barometer of just how deeply this scandal had shaken the Bayou State. Mainstream media outlets like The Advocate, The Times-Picayune, and NOLA.com covered the story extensively, their headlines reflecting a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Louisiana's largest Ponzi scheme unraveled, the Wade Daughtridge story, read one such headline, capturing both the magnitude of the crime and the notoriety of its mastermind. But it wasn't just the scale of the fraud that captured public attention, it was also the audacity of the scheme itself. Over a period of several years, Daughtridge had convinced hundreds of investors to pour millions of dollars into a fictitious real estate venture. In total, he managed to swindle over $30 million before being exposed. The public's perception of this crime was further shaped by the political and social ramifications that followed. High-profile politicians, including then-Governor Bobby Jindal, were forced to answer tough questions about their ties to Daughtridge and whether they had turned a blind eye to signs of wrongdoing. Meanwhile, community leaders scrambled to reassure the public that such a massive fraud wouldn't happen again. They pointed to new regulations and oversight measures designed to prevent similar crimes in the future. But for many Louisianans, these efforts rang hollow. The damage had already been done. The Daughtridge case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed and the importance of transparency in financial dealings. And while it's true that those responsible faced consequences for their actions, the scars left by this audacious scheme continue to linger. In the end, the public response to Louisiana's biggest financial crime was a testament to the power of investigative journalism and the resilience of a community determined to hold those in power accountable. It served as a stark reminder that fraud can happen anywhere, at any time, and that vigilance is the only surefire way to prevent it. Reflecting on the case of Louisiana's biggest financial crime, it's impossible not to recognize its significance in our state's history. The sheer audacity of the scheme, orchestrated by former Congressman William Jefferson, and the staggering dollar amount involved, over $400,000 left an indelible mark on the psyche of Louisianans. Yet, what truly sets this case apart is the public response. This saga became a textbook example of how investigative journalism can serve as a beacon of hope amidst chaos and corruption. It demonstrated that no matter how powerful or influential a person might be, they are not immune to scrutiny when they betray the trust placed in them by those they represent. The fallout from this scandal reached far beyond the courtroom. It sparked conversations about transparency, ethics, and accountability at every level of government. And while it's easy to focus on the negative aspects, we must also acknowledge the positive outcomes. This case served as a catalyst for change, prompting tighter regulations and stricter enforcement measures designed to prevent similar occurrences in the future. However, let us not forget that fraud is like a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more may sprout in its place. The scars left by this audacious scheme continue to linger, reminding us that vigilance is not a one-time task, but an ongoing commitment. As citizens, we have a responsibility to stay informed, ask questions, and demand answers. We must remember that our democracy thrives on participation, not apathy. By fostering a culture of curiosity and critical thinking, we can ensure that the story of William Jefferson remains a cautionary tale rather than a prophecy fulfilled. In the end, Louisiana's biggest financial crime didn't just expose the dark underbelly of political corruption, it revealed the strength and resilience of a community determined to fight back. And that, perhaps, is the most significant lesson of all.